Welcome to Hotline TV. I'm Quinn McCord.
And I'm John Mercurio. All right, some incumbent senators may be joining Utah Senator Bob Bennett in involuntary retirement really soon. Really soon, Quinn. All right, today we're going to look at the insurgent candidates who have a chance, just a chance, but a chance nonetheless, to oust sitting senators. So we're talking about outsiders running as a sort of anti-establishment challengers against incumbents. Three of these races coming up next week. Two or three, I can't remember. Anyway, a lot of these races coming up next week, and we're going to be watching all those races closely. Quinn, talk to us. We're going to start at 5, which is the insurgent outsider who's least likely to oust the incumbent, going to number 1, the most likely. Let's go.
I'd have to pick Andrew Romanoff in Colorado Senate. You know, it's funny, there was a time when we thought he was basically at the Sestak level,
right,
but he doesn't have Sestak's money.
Right.
Spectre obviously has more things to run against.
I'm going to agree with you there because I think Romanoff, the biggest problem is that he doesn't have Arlen Specter's voting record to run against. Michael Bennett, you know, has only been in Washington for a couple of weeks, basically, a couple months really, but he's only been there a short time, and he has a really good line of response against Romanoff. So I agree with you there.
All right. For my second choice, I'm going with J.D. Hayworth. You know, I think he has a chance to beat John McCain, but I think, you know, McCain has benefited from a few things. One thing is the Democrats really just don't like him. He got beat up by Obama, the Democrats, 2 years ago. He early on realized he had to stay very conservative. He's running a new anti-immigration ad. I think he's well positioned. Oh, and the Arizona primary is now open to independents.
Interesting. Okay, that's a very good point. All right, I'm going to disagree with you here, and I'm glad we're disagreeing. Sometimes that's fun. I think that Bill Halter, who started off again as a very strong candidate against Blanche Lincoln, is now having to answer answer questions about his position on card check. Not something he wants to talk about. A lot of his backing comes from organized labor, but supporting card check in Arkansas right now, not a very popular thing. Popular in the Democratic primary, but not so much in the general. He's dodging questions about it, and I think it points to the fact that he's very vulnerable on that. Plus, I think Lincoln still, at this point, still looks strong in the primary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think
he's run a very effective ad campaign.
You know, I agree that the odds are against Halter, but I still think he has some chance to maybe at least force her into the runoff next week.
Okay,
maybe.
All right. I think the ads, I'm going to put Hayworth just one notch above Halter because I think the ads that McCain is running are very smart for a Republican primary, but they show that he's scared. They show that he's scared. He's veering farther to the right, I think, than any other Republican incumbent running for re-election this year. And that's because he has a potentially strong threat. I don't think necessarily at the end of the day Hayworth wins, but I think he's forcing McCain to run scared.
Yes. Now, next position, I'm going with Joe Sestak. And by the way, for the record, I said a month ago, either he is running the worst campaign in history or the best campaign.
That was a brilliant thing you said.
And some turns because he was going nowhere for a year, and now all of a sudden he's coming from nowhere. Maybe he knew what he was doing.
I think he did.
Saving that $5 million. I'm
going to put Sestak up there too, and part of it is a sort of a perfect storm of events. It really is, and I think I'm not the first to say this, but Barack Obama's nomination of Elena Kagan puts yet another awkward situation in Arlen Specter's lap. He voted against her very vocally in 2009 as Solicitor General, and it's yet another reminder to Pennsylvania Democratic primary voters that this is someone who just a year ago was a Republican who was supporting the Republican Party line on a host of issues.
Excellent. And for the top spot, I think we both have.
We both have
Rand Paul. You know, I would say Sestak is ahead by like a hair maybe. Rand Paul is ahead by more than a few hairs.
More than a few.
Against Trey Grayson.
I agree.
I mean, all the polls show him ahead, and yes, it could tighten. Yes, Trey Grayson had more money going into the last weeks, but
I think it's interesting that Trey Grayson, during the debate on Monday night, was sort of embracing the establishment strategy, embracing and defending these controversial earmarks that Hal Rogers in the state, who's endorsed Grayson, had received. And I think it really pointed to the fact that he has to double down. There's no way of avoiding at this point for Grayson the establishment mantle. And I think, unfortunately for him, this year, that is not a winning strategy. And that could become a big problem for McConnell. Good stuff. All right.
All right.
All right, let's move on to number two section, our favorite section, I believe. I think you believe too. The bandwagon section of Hotline TV. Quinn, whose bandwagon are you jumping on today, and whose bandwagon are you jumping off?
Today I'm jumping on Elaine Marshall's bandwagon.
Wow.
You know, for a long time we thought, oh, she's been around forever. She's not going to win the Democratic primary North Carolina Senate race. But her campaign put out a good memo this week, and most of these memos are normally junk, but it points out that Elaine Marshall finished first or second in every county in the state, whereas Cal Cunningham came in like 4th place behind like nobodies in certain parts of the state. So it is true that Elaine Marshall has a broader pool from which to sort of emerge in the runoff a month from now.
Well, that's interesting, and there was also a PPP poll out today that showed Marshall tied with Burr. Tied with Burr, and actually Burr doing worse in 2010 than Elizabeth Dole did at the comparable point in the re-election campaign that she lost to Kay Hagan.
It's a different year, though.
It's a very different year, very good point. But, I mean, Kay Hagan beat her by, like, what, 85 points?
Yeah.
So that was a big deal.
Who are you on?
I am jumping on, not Elaine Marshall, but Elaine Kagan, which is kind of obvious. Obviously, we're all jumping on Elaine Kagan's bandwagon as she's been nominated for the Supreme Court. But I really think you're seeing at this point a very, very smooth confirmation process. You've got a couple members of the Republican leadership in the Senate already running away from the idea of doing a filibuster. You've got only one at this point, as I know of, on Tuesday, Republican senator who said he's going to vote against her. Clearly there will be more than one, probably something in the single digits or low double digits, but I really think this is going to be smooth sailing for Obama, and that's what Democrats want. They want this whole thing wrapped up by July 1st, so that they're focused as much as possible through Labor Day and into November, not on a Supreme Court nomination, but on jobs and the economy.
All right, real quick, my off bandwagon is for Meg Whitman. I think Steve Poizner is like the Joe Sestak of the West Coast. I mean, this was a non-primary that all of a sudden has become a real primary. I'm not saying Poizner's going to beat Whitman, but there's a chance.
There is a chance. I'm not sure how running an ad calling him a liberal is really that effective. I mean, he's clearly positioned himself as a conservative. But you're right. I don't think California voters have shown a real love for self-funded candidates in the past.
True.
So I'm going to jump off Mitch McConnell's bandwagon. I know he's a big friend of the show, watches it every week, and so I'm sorry to have to do this to you, Senator. But I think, look, if your hand-picked candidate in your state loses his Senate primary and loses it badly next week, Trey Grayson, who we were just talking about, that's a big embarrassment for you, coming right off of Charlie Crist's decision to leave the party. Again, your hand-picked endorsed candidate, the NRSC endorsed him, and I think there are going to be a lot of questions going into next year. If Republicans make gains in the Senate but don't take back the majority, you could start to see some rumblings about Mitch McConnell losing his leadership position.
All right, Hotline fans, now let's look at our favorite TV ad of the week.
I've spent my whole life fighting for less government. They know I'll shake up Washington. They want to make this about chickens and checks, a check I wrote decades ago and a statement they've taken out of context. That's what's wrong with Washington. Lies and dirty tricks. It's time we pull the plug on these boys. I'm Sue Loudon, and I approve this message.
You know, I have to say about this Sue Loudon ad, I thought it was a pretty good ad. She's very sort of well-spoken and photogenic, and obviously this is for a TV ad, not in person, but, you know, I was kind of liking her after I saw this.
It was. You know, I think she did everything she possibly could. I agree with you. She comes off very forceful, but she's still suffering, I think, from that chicken bartering comment, and she's still suffering from in that Republican primary. It comes off, I think, interestingly, as though she's appealing to women voters, because I think the ad is called "Boys Will Be Boys."
Exactly.
I don't think she actually utters those words during the ad, but I think it might.
She does say, like, okay, yeah, I think she does.
She says boys will be boys.
Something like that.
So it's interesting. It's sort of that, it's sort of appealing for sympathy, these boys picking on the one female candidate in the race. So I think that could be part of her strategy. But you're right, she looks good. She's taking on issues that a lot of candidates would run away from. It could be effective, but she's still suffered a lot of damage.
Oh, and it looks like we're all out of time, John.
Oh, Quinn, I'm sorry about that. Well, thanks so much for joining us here on Hotline TV.
My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you on Hotline TV.